Fur is out, so is wool, mohair, cashmere. Now add alpaca to the list of fabrics that are unwearably cruel. A new investigation next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. PETA's latest undercover video investigation, released Sunday in the New York Times, exposes the use and abuse of animals in the alpaca wool industry in Peru. This is the first ever investigation and documentation of the violent process of shearing alpacas, and follows PETA's other groundbreaking investigations into the abuse of animals for the fashion industry, including video exposés into Angora from rabbits in China, crocodile farms in Zimbabwe and Vietnam, alligator farms in Texas, ostriches in South Africa, and sheep wool in numerous countries. Before PETA released the video, it approached several companies, and as a result, Esprit is phasing out alpaca wool, and as a first step, Gap Incorporated, which owns Banana Republic, Athleta, and other brands, and H&M Group, which owns 8 brands, have cut ties with the alpaca farm's parent company, the Michell Group, which is the leading exporter of alpaca fiber. PETA is also asking Peruvian authorities to investigate for possible violations of the country's animal protection laws. Here's my conversation with the head of the investigation, Dan Paden, PETA's Vice President of Evidence Analysis, on the PETA Podcast. So Dan Paden, Vice President of Evidence Analysis at PETA, thank you for being part of the PETA Podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
So let me ask you this. Explain what the PETA investigators found in this investigation that you headed up with the alpacas in Peru. What did they find?
This is a first of its kind undercover look at this industry. And in essence, they found that workers struck these animals, kicked them, picked them up. Many of them were pregnant. Slammed them down onto tables, tied them down by their legs, and sheared them pretty quickly, pretty roughly, cut them up quite badly in some cases. And all this is happening at the world's largest privately owned alpaca farm, which is really seen as kind of a leader in the industry. And if this is the best that the industry has to offer, then obviously it's a tremendous concern for consumers and for companies. And thankfully, some have taken action on that. Peru produces something like 90% of the world's alpaca fiber. This company that owns the farm itself produces about 80% or exports about 80% of global alpaca fiber, yarns, tops, things like that are used for clothing. So in the U.S., there is some of this going on, but not on the level that is happening in Peru, thankfully.
Now, I remember growing up, and I don't want to date myself, but I remember seeing that a real luxury item was an alpaca sweater. And I remember growing up thinking, God, if I can only have an alpaca sweater, that would be so cool. And, golfers like Arnold Palmer wore alpaca.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a real, it was kind of a statusy thing for a while. I guess you get the material and alpaca, I guess it's alpaca wool or it's alpaca fiber, really, right?
Yeah, or fleece. I think it's all interchangeable depending on who you ask. Yeah.
And so what do describe the products that we would see alpaca fibers used in? I just mentioned Arnold Palmer's sweater. It was a cardigan, and that was like, I was a little kid and Arnold Palmer was on TV. And that was kind of a statusy thing. But what do people use? Alpaca, what? Sweaters mostly?
Still sweaters. Yeah, still sweaters, scarves, blankets, throws, home goods, things like that seem to be a big thing now. There was actually an item for sale with with anthropology that we found that had alpacas printed on it. It was an alpaca sweater and it had prints of alpacas on there. So, clearly people know that they're wearing the hair of an animal. What they don't know until this video came out is what that animal went through and the sounds that animal made and the spit and the vomit that she probably, expectorated. It was being sheared.
All right. So look, we're going to get into that. I want to see what the investigation found, but I wanted first to let people know about, where they would find it, because alpaca is still in use and people would use it instead of, say, mohair or instead of any other kind of wool, right?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
And then tell me about the animal itself.
So they are prey animals. They're prey animals just like sheep, just like goats. So we've seen in the shearing of sheep for their wool and of goats for whether it's mohair or for cashmere, that these animals are terrified when they're pinned down and when they're held in place for shearing. And the alpacas are the exact same way. They're a lot larger than those other animals we're more familiar with, but psychologically speaking anyway, they're very, very similar. And these animals cannot... humanity has bred them over generations and generations to have an unnaturally thick, dense coat that they can't shed naturally. So they're at tremendous risk of having a lot of waste built up and so on and so forth. So, while in a sense they have to be sheared because of the way that we've engineered them, there is no reason to shear them in the way that they were being handled in this video whatsoever.
So when you call them prey animals, what do you mean? They're animals that are preyed upon?
They're preyed upon. And one of the experts that we showed this video to, one of the things the video shows is these workers standing on these animals' necks, either before they're sheared or afterwards. And one of the veterinarians who specializes in these kinds of animals pointed out very perceptively, I thought, was that, that's exactly what a predator would do to one of these animals, is pin them down and go for the neck. And the tremendous fear, and terror that these animals went through was in large part due to a very real sense that they had that, their life was about to end right then and there.
So these animals, being animals who are preyed upon, are relatively peaceful. They're mild. They're not aggressive. They have these big, bushy bodies of hair that they can't really shed easily. So they probably are a little uncomfortable, in the heat. And so what kind of lives do they usually have?
We didn't get to see the conditions in which they're kept, for the majority of the year. We saw them when they were brought in for shearing, and they were, put in a pretty stressful position at that time. At other times, it's our understanding that they're at least given the chance to walk around and to stretch their legs and, to be out on some grass. That being said, just like in other industries where these animals are used primarily for their coats, when their quote unquote production wanes, when that coat is, no longer as fine or valuable perhaps as it was in prior years, they're killed and eaten, just like sheep and goats are on farms in, say, Australia or South Africa. So they meet a very early and a very cruel, painful end after going through this shearing for several years.
So they're used for meat when they're considered not valuable any longer in the fabric market. But to give our listeners a sense of the size of the market, I guess, would it be similar to other wool industries? Would it be similar to the amount of, say, dollars that would be attracted to mohair or other kind of wool?
Exactly right. Yeah, mohair, cashmere, things like that. So, not as prevalent and high numbers as sheep's wool, but I think one thing that happens is the more PETA exposes, one industry, some consumers and some fashion designers then just kind of gravitate towards, another type of animal hair. And so it's just kind of like this, chase where, okay, we've shown how bad wool is. People are moving away from wool. Then they move to mohair. Well, we show how bad mohair is, and they go to cashmere. Well, we show how bad cashmere is for animals. And now it's alpaca and so forth. So one by one, we're taking them down, thankfully.
Like I remember it growing up, but people are using it.
People are using it, and, they do it under the false assumption, like with so many other industries, that somehow that the animals are not harmed in the process. And, a lot of that has to do with the claims that these companies make.
The company made a claim and you went to action. How did you know that you had to go into the largest alpaca farm in the world?
So they state very plainly on their website that the animals are not harmed in the process of shearing. And, obviously we doubt that to be the case, just like we doubt any kind of industrial claim that animals are not paying the price, for products that are being made from parts of their body, especially in large numbers and on a mass scale. And this farm, this place is called Malkini, is held up and touted as, a state of the art, really the best that the alpaca industry, at least in Peru, has to offer. And so it seemed like a great place to visit and to see what the reality was for these animals. So you weren't tipped off. You just sent in an investigator to go down to the farm. How difficult was that? It was very easy, actually. In fact, this was a tour. This was actually an accompanied tour over 2 days in which the ranch manager was present for the most of the time. And so this is what they do when they know people are actually watching. And so one has to wonder if it's even worse, perhaps, and more stressful, when there are not strangers around or not onlookers. But yeah, we had 2 investigators go and simply just express interest in wanting to see how this was done and what this industry is all about. And they were capturing this video that we've published all along. So it's on the PETA website. Do you think that that it is an example of the standard, or do you think it's probably far worse than you can imagine? I think it's actually worse. Unfortunately, I think that what's shown on that video is terrible enough for animals, obviously. But I do think that we have to keep in mind that things might have been done a bit less cruelly than they normally were. And of course, there are other operations across that country, and we haven't seen that yet. And we don't know exactly what that means. But, I've worked every single wool industry investigation that PETA and its international affiliates have done. That's been 13 of them now. Mm-hmm. And that's 116 different properties in that industry. And we've yet to go to a single one where animals weren't suffering. And so, we have the experience and we have the numbers to show that, when you're going to be using animals for their hair, when you're going to be taking it forcefully from them, the animals are going to suffer. It might be, on a scale from 1 to 10, it might be an 8 at one farm and a 9 at the next, but they're going to suffer. And the easiest for people who care is to simply stop buying those products. So this is the world's largest alpaca farm. The name of it again? Malkini. Yeah, Malkini. And it's owned by a company called the Michell Group, which is based in Peru. Okay, so how many alpacas live on this farm, and what did the investigator find? They have about 4,000 animals at this farm at any given time. And, they were herded into this stockyard, concrete floored stockyard. Workers pick them up by the base of their tails, which veterinarians we consulted said probably caused dislocations, fractures, permanent nerve damage, things like that. As I said, a lot of these animals were pregnant. They were doing this just before birth, so they slammed these heavily pregnant animals down onto these tables. They tied all 4 of their limbs into, basically it looks like a torture device, a medieval rack. So the animals are restrained. They pull on the ropes in all 4 directions. They almost essentially quarter them. The legs are almost out of their sockets. The animals are crying out, screaming. They're vomiting. They're spitting. They're regurgitating, which is all a sign of tremendous fear. And then, in come the workers with the electric clippers that we're all familiar with from watching sheep videos and so forth. They get sheared up. They work quickly. These guys are probably paid, just like in the wool industry, they're probably paid not by how much time they spend, but rather by how many animals they get through. So the catalyst there, the motivation there is to go faster and faster. And as a result, the animals are more and more cut up. Some of them were stitched right there on the floor. Minimal pain relief at best. And if anyone was given pain relief at all, it wouldn't have been effective. It was just a topical numbing spray you'd put on a bug bite, not something you'd put on a deep gaping wound.
It sounds pretty bad, but is it worse because of the speed and carelessness of the workers, or does that just aggravate it, or is it just is the process just bad to begin with, or is there? What I'm trying to get at is there a way that the company can live up to its claim that their animals aren't harmed?
The way in which they're doing it is adding injury to insult. That's what the cuts and the poor handling. The restraint and all that is exacerbating the animal's stress. Shearing is going to be stressful for these animals, no matter how you do it. It just simply is. That being said, there are animal sanctuaries in the U.S. who have alpacas, who, for their health and for their welfare and their comfort, do have to be sheared, once a year. And there are ways to do that with minimal restraint. There are ways to do that with the animals actually standing up on all 4, so they don't feel like they are in a position of being preyed upon. And you can do it. Now, they're still going to be stressed to some extent, but, that's for their comfort. Whereas at a ranch that has 4,000 of these animals and is doing this to make millions of dollars, the motive is profit, and the animals are paying the price.
They get put in this situation. They're under stress. Describe the video that shows. What did you find?
I've watched a lot of sheep videos and I've watched a lot of goat shearing videos, and none of that could prepare me really for the sounds that these alpacas made. The New York Times just broke this story on Sunday, and the lead article, or the lead line, was comparing these animals' cries to an electric pencil sharpener. That it sounded more like a machine than an animal, than a mammal. And it's true. It's a piercing, loud, persistent cry. It sounds like it's at the top of their lungs, and it endures for 3 or 4 minutes while this, every single animal is sheared. And the sounds, people might look at it and they say, "Oh, I can't bear to watch it." But, if you close your eyes, but you keep the volume on, you'll know exactly what's going on. You can't mistake it for anything but panic and just, soul penetrating fear. And one of their defense mechanisms is to spit. And because they eat a lot of plant material, what they produce from their stomach contents is green, and they spit this almost bile-like substance out. And these animals were doing it over and over and over again, which of course is, illustrative of how much stress they're under, and the fact that they're trying to keep these predators literally away from them. And some went even further than that and just couldn't even contain their own stomach contents anymore, and just actively just vomited large amounts of material right on the floor. And in a lot of cases that was actually swept up with the fleece that was probably baled up and sent on to be turned into yarns and so forth.
So these crying alpacas, crying and vomiting, the handlers have them by the ears
Mm-hmm.
while they shear them with these clippers. And so these stressed out animals, this noise from the clippers and the crying and the vomiting, this does not sound like a fun job.
This is not a luxury fashion item. This is. I mean, it's just as terrible and grotesque as the investigations we've done of say the crocodile farms and the alligator farms and the ostrich farms. Where all these exotic animals are kept and slaughtered for their skins and for their feathers. For these high end, fancy designer, triple figure on the price tag items that people think is a sign of opulence and luxury and affluence. And in reality, it's you're just aligning yourself with cruelty, and coming at the expense of, as you've said, gentle animals, sensitive animals, very intelligent, complex animals, unique animals, just as deserving of respect and compassion and, being left to enjoy their lives as are dogs, cats, other animals we're more familiar with in the U.S.
How did the investigator who's witnessing this, and how did you deal with seeing these images? How do you deal with looking at this abuse, which is so graphic?
In a sense, it's almost empowering because I think the people who go and capture this video and those of us in the office who watch it and try to, piece things together, we know that this is happening to countless more animals than we can possibly document individually. And in documenting just a handful of these animals, a few hundred, who are being sheared over the course of 2 days, we've now put those animals' fate before the eyes of millions of kind people who have the ability, just by having a credit card in their pocket, to make tremendous change, for these animals and for other animals, just by what they purchase or what they refuse to purchase going forward. And so we have faith and trust that we're going to be able to do a service to this species or for this species, for alpacas, by being there to observe and to document what some of them go through and then to share it with people, so that we are that much closer to the day when none of them will have to go through that.
Dan, what's strange is that alpaca has been around for years. Suddenly, there's a market for them. How did that happen? After sort of, I mean, are they really considered a luxury item? Is it a pricey? Has suddenly alpaca fiber become pricey? Is that why there's this mad rush by companies, or this one in particular, to provide the world with all its alpaca fiber?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of factors. I do think, more and more consumers are becoming more and more aware of the cruelties inherent in, say, fur or leather, and are moving away from that, and yet are not going vegan with their clothing selections. And so there's been this trend to start using, rabbit hair, right, or cashmere or mohair or something like that. There's also this increased awareness, I think, that clothing items have environmental impact as well. And there is, if you're a caring consumer and you care about the environment and that's your priority, and the manufacturer puts before you an image of these beautiful alpacas out on a pasture up in the Andes Mountains, of South America, it's very easy to fall for that and think, if these animals are living decent lives and they're not in a crowded feedlot and, their waste is not polluting a stream or adding to greenhouse gases and so forth. And so, I'm going to have a lighter footprint on the climate and by by making a different decision. And, honestly, actually, a lot of these animal-based clothing items are far worse for the environment than our vegan alternatives. And so, whether you're concerned about animals, you're concerned about workers, you're concerned about the planet, or all three, I think the vegan clothing options really are the best bet.
And that means not using alpaca or wool or anything else. But now, after hearing you about this investigation, they can read about it also in the New York Times. They can go to PETA.org and see the video that PETA's undercover investigators took. But what should listeners, or how can listeners help this situation?
Sure. It's two things, really. The first thing is just to refuse to buy these animals' fleece. When you're out shopping, you pick up an item or you're online, look at the label, look what's, in there as the ingredients, so to speak. And if it says alpaca, just move on. The other thing that we're asking people to do right now is to urge anthropology to drop alpaca immediately in favor of animal-friendly materials. So Esprit saw this video before we published it, and they've decided to phase this material out. Gap and H&M have seen this video and cut ties with this company, and so we're setting our sights now on anthropology, and we need people who care and who are moved by this video contact anthropology and urge them to just cut ties with this type of animal clothing and use acrylic or bamboo or a host of vegan alternatives that are out there.
Okay, and one last question for you. It's a personal one. I mean, First of all, I hope you're healthy and well and all that.
You too.
And I know it's a stressful time to begin with, but when you see something like this, you realize how the animals, certainly the llamas in Peru, aren't spared. How do you personally deal with it? I mean, you've done 13 investigations on wool alone, and you say this would have to rank right up there? Is it worse? Is it better? And how do you deal with having seen all this?
Yeah, it's one of the first things that I told one of my coworkers here when I first saw the video was I said, to me, this kind of combines the worst of the sheep shearing with the worst of the goat shearing, in the sense of you have these gentle, docile animals being just contorted into terrible positions, just like basically lambs are on all these farms. And then you have these piercing cries, kind of like the Angora goats made in South Africa 2 years ago. So you combine that, and it's chilling and it's disturbing. The COVID pandemic has really made me realize that the fear that we feel in this day and age, and the uncertainty and just the kind of unremitting concern for where this country is going, where this world is going, what's going to be left next week, next month, next year. I mean, that's what animals go through every day in all these industries, and we're just getting a taste of the panic that these animals experience as their whole existence. Whether you're talking about pigs on a factory farm, or cattle in a feedlot, or minks on a fur farm, monkeys in a laboratory, mice in a laboratory, an elephant in a circus. I mean, it's terrible for humanity right now, and obviously I hope and pray that things get better for all of us very soon. But it's just an example of what we have put animals into every day, and I hope that it makes us more sympathetic to other species, experiences on this planet.
Dan Paden, I appreciate your time. Dan is the Vice President of Evidence Analysis for PETA. Thanks, Dan. PETA's Vice Vice President of Evidence Analysis, Dan Paden. He led that Alpaca investigation. And for more information, you can go to PETA.org. And that's our program. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog, ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog, or at amok.com, AMOK.com, my website. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.